Good morning. This is Kelsey from Kelsey Reads Things at Anna Porter Public Library in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing with you City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. Now this is the first book in her Mortal Instrument series, and it is the series that I recommend you start this entire universe with. As I mentioned, there are quite a few different series from Cassandra Clare that are all melded into the same universe that she created, which we are first introduced to in City of Bones. I'm just going to go ahead and see if this edition has the other. It does. It has the other series. So after this one is the prequel series, and that's the Infernal Devices. Now again, it's recommended that you read the first three of this series first. So that includes City of Bones, City of Ashes, and finally City of Glass. I will be doing a review on City of Ashes probably in the next couple of weeks, because I don't want to just do book reviews of series I'm reading. I also need to be discussing standalone books and other things I'm reading, so that you guys have a chance to read these books along with me. Today I'm discussing this first one, and I will discuss the sequel probably in another couple of weeks. So again, City of Bones, the next series that follows it, that is the prequel series, is the Infernal Devices. And then you have the Bane Chronicles, the Dark Artifices, and I want to say there's at least one more. I will get back to you on that. Alrighty, I moved a little bit so that we can work with the light that we're dealing with this morning. Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, so City of Bones. What is this book about? City of Bones opens with Clary Frey. She is a 15-year-old girl who lives in New York City. She's like any other young teenager who wants to go out on a Friday night in the summer, and that is exactly what she does. She's with her friend Simon. They go to this club called the Pandemonium Club, and the last thing she expects is to witness a murder. In fact, a murder done by 3 teenagers with tattoos of runes all over their bodies. Not only that, she doesn't expect to be the witness of a murder, she also doesn't expect the corpse to then disappear, which is exactly what happens. And after Clary is the witness of all of this, her life just starts to kind of spiral apart. Not long after the events of running into these teens, who, again, murder a random person and then the body disappears, Clary's own mother is attacked in their apartment, and she has disappeared as well. And from that point forward, Clary is kind of thrust into this world that she never expected to have, any interaction with. She didn't realize that supernatural beings were afoot or even existed. That is how she ends up into the world of the Shadow Hunters. And Shadow Hunters are, they are half angels, technically they are angel blessed. I'm not necessarily sure if they're half angels. I'll really need to look into that, but they were blessed by an angel with abilities to fight and defend mortals and the world from demons. They're like a super hero race of people, basically. They are above us mere mortals. But again, she becomes acquaintanced with these teenagers who she finds out are shadow hunters, and she finds out that they are technically Nephilim. So I guess they are like the offspring of angels. It's a little convoluted and confusing, but again, I will get back to you on that at a later time to kind of dive in and explain their race a little more thoroughly. Okay, so then at the end of this long, convoluted explanation of the plot, Clary then has to depend on these teenagers, gain their trust, and they need to gain hers in order to find her mother again and to find out some key insights to her past and things that she didn't realize about herself before. And that is the general premise, the general plot line of City of Bones, The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare. So overall, for a debut novel, it really wasn't bad. I will say it was not my favorite though. In fact, I first tried to read this book years ago when I was a young adult myself. In fact, Clary and I are, I believe, the same age, both born in 1991. So it's kind of cool now going back and reading this from her viewpoint as a 15, 16-year-old girl, because I was 15, 16 in 2006 as well. So it was just a little bit of like nostalgia. So that was cool to read about. So I don't know if I gave my official rating yet, but I gave it a 3 stars. As I mentioned, it was okay for a debut, but there were definitely a few things that could have been improved on. And now I'm going to go into a few of my thoughts. The writing style in general could have used some work. I think some of the metaphors that Cassandra Clare used didn't exactly make sense, and I think the editing could have used a little bit of work. And I also thought that some of the characters and how they were written was a little bit underdeveloped. However, luckily this is a series, and because of that we have plenty more books for characters to develop and grow, and for us to further understand them and their motives, and their motivations, and why they are the way they are. So that, I guess I could give her a little bit of slack on, but again, I felt like the characters in the beginning were a little bit underdeveloped. The world building was honestly one of the best parts of this book. It was really fascinating to read about a race of superhumans whose main goal is to protect humanity, albeit begrudgingly. It reminded me of my Marine husband talking about, taking care of civilians, and how there's just a little bit of tension and almost resentment because they're the ones defending us, and we are mere mortals. So that was interesting to make that correlation. I would have, though, appreciated a little more background information about the Clave itself, about the band of brothers, I think they were, or the Silent Brothers, that's what it was. They were the Silent Brothers. And just maybe a little bit about how their world came to be. So I'm hoping that we'll see a little more of that in book 3. That is the one I am on right now, and I do believe they are in Idris, or at least they enter Idris. But that's another topic for another day. Today we're focusing on City of Bones, Kelsey. One book at a time. One book at a time. So back to my thoughts on this book. I was not the biggest fan of most of the characters. Clary eventually kind of, I warmed up to her, I guess I should say, but most of the characters I was kind of meh about, and a few of them I just genuinely did not like. However, I did notice as the story was unfolding, some of the characters did start to show a little more maturity, and I do try to keep in mind that this book was written about teenagers, and that means that they are going to have the mindsets of younger people and probably make mistakes that I think are unnecessary or ridiculous. But at the time of being 16, I probably would have agreed that that's a great idea, or that's a completely rational and logical way to react to something. So digging into a little more about the characters and about Clary specifically, this is a young adult story about a girl who didn't realize that she was more powerful than she ever could have known. And she's lied to by a parent in order to protect her. That's a pretty common trope. It's kind of a story we've all seen and or read before, but I think the way that Cassandra Clare writes this was interesting, and it did keep me on my toes a little bit, and it did strike my interest enough to keep going. I recommend reading the first one rather than listening to the audiobook, because I personally was just not a fan of the narrator, but again, that is a personal preference, and this is a book review video which is full of personal thoughts, opinions, and preferences, so just keep that in mind. I will say the story itself and the plot improved as it was going, as the characters did, and matured as well. The final twist actually is what kept me interested enough to continue reading the series. That, and so many people have recommended this series on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram. It is literally everywhere. So I thought I would go ahead and put aside my old thoughts and just give it a shot. And I'm really glad that I decided to do that after all. The setting was really cool. It was interesting to, think of magic existing in a city like New York, just because it's already full of all kinds of secrets and it's such a large urban setting. So I think it would be easier to hide that kind of, like secret about the universe than it would be like maybe in a rural community. The main villain was a bit underwhelming, to say the least. We weren't really sure what his plan was or what his motivation was outside of being against the Clave. And the Clave is like the ruling, not the ruling class, but they're kind of like the government in this world. They determine, the laws, what's right, what's wrong, they determine punishments. They keep the order, basically, of this entire Shadowhunter world, and he is very much against them because with any government there's going to be a little bit of corruption. I would have liked to see a little bit more of what his actual plans were and his motivations outside of just wanting to completely eradicate the Clave. The blooming romance. That is something that is a little bit problematic, and I can't really dive into why it was problematic because it would give away a major spoiler, but I will just say that I do believe that eventually gets resolved in book 3. So I look forward to eventually coming to that part and discussing it with you at a later time. But I will say, because it's young adult and because it's a best-selling series, that there is some clarity that comes to this romance and all is resolved. So now I'm going to just touch a little more on characters specifically and what I liked or at least took from them and what some things maybe I didn't necessarily enjoy about them. Clary is our main protagonist. She is 15 years old. She's young and naive, but she's also really spunky and kind of sarcastic and really determined. So I liked that about her a lot. She also is an artist. She has artistic abilities like her mother. She loves to sketch. And I wish we had learned a little bit more about her abilities. I mean, like, it's touched on pretty heavily, but again, I just really like artistic protagonists, characters in general, whether they're the main character or not. I've always enjoyed reading about people who have those kind of abilities, so maybe that's just me. I think that Clary showed a lot of growth and maturity by the end of the book. I mean, she definitely asked a lot of questions, but considering where she was coming from, a completely normal, mundane life, and then thrust into this Shadowhunter world that she knew nothing about previously, I think it's fair to expect that she's going to have a lot of questions. I felt like she handled a lot of the stressors and the unexpected trials for a character of her age fairly well, to be honest. Like I said, she really grew on me by the end of the book. And again, she is 15 going on 16 years old, so I tried to have a lot of patience for younger characters that I'm reading about. Jace! Jace was the main guy from this story, main Shadowhunter guy. He's definitely kind of like the leader of the three. They're the Lightwoods. I think I should have explained that. There's Jace Wayland. He was kind of like adopted by the Lightwoods. Elizabeth Lightwood, Alec Lightwood, and their youngest brother, Matt Lightwood, who I don't even know. I don't think he makes an appearance until book 2, so he's not as important to the center of the story. Jace is like their leader. He's kind of like their adopted brother, and he definitely has a bad boy attitude problem. He reminds me of the typical angry, attractive male character that you find in a lot of young adult books, but also considering his background and some things that we learn about his character, it kind of makes sense. He was not treated well growing up, and that is all I'm going to say on that subject. I will say I did kind of understand him once we do learn a little bit about his background, but he's still not a favorite, and he's definitely a character that I think could use some improvements. And again, I'm just going off my thoughts on book one. A lot of these opinions kind of expand and even change a little bit as the series unfolded for me. Simon. I love Simon. So Simon is Clary's best friend. I don't know if I ever actually touched on that, but Simon exists and he is not related to the Lightwoods and he's not related to Clary. He's just a best friend. He's that nerdy, sarcastic, like musician guy that everybody wants as a best friend. He's really good natured. He was, again, sarcastic and just funny and kind of the voice of reason. Some might say that Simon could be a little too cautious and overprotective of Clary, but I definitely understand where he's coming from. He, of course, is also a mundane who has had no exposure whatsoever to the Shadowhunter world, to demons, to any kind of things that go bump in the night. So, of course, he's going to be wary of these three strangers that are trying to help Clary find her mother again. I would be cautious and nervous and a little apprehensive as well. He was also kind of the comedic relief that I needed in this book to keep me reading, so thank you for that, Simon. He was definitely a favorite character. Isabelle Lightwood. She is one of the Lightwoods, obviously. She is the middle child, and she is definitely a tough gal who's not afraid to show it. Isabelle was more about, I guess, physical ability. That's really kind of her specialty. But she also looks really good dressed up. So I like that balance of being like a really tough female character while also knowing how to, I guess, be feminine. I like characters that are dynamic, and Isabelle was definitely dynamic, so I don't really have a lot of complaints about her. Alec was more of a challenge for me to like. Alec kind of reminded me of Jace, but like, he was exceptionally more grouchy. There's an explanation for that, and it definitely makes sense once the reveal is, revealed. But I thought in general that Alec was just a little too much of a sourpuss in this book. He was not my favorite character, but again, the story and the world building of this book was interesting enough to keep me reading. And finally, Hodge. Hodge is just like the chill librarian guy uncle that you want around, that we all kind of wish we had had growing up, and I liked Hodge for the most part throughout this book. And in case I didn't mention this, in fact I don't think I did mention this, there are a few triggers that you should be aware of in this book series. They include missing parents, violence, and I'm not going to say precisely what this is because it will be a huge spoiler, but an inappropriate relationship. I will put it that way. So again, overall, I gave this debut young adult novel 3 stars. It was not my favorite. The writing style needed some improvement. The characters were at first a little bit underdeveloped, but did grow a bit. But just in general, because the characters were kind of hard for me to root for, at times I gave it a lower rating. However, book 2 did pique my interest a little bit more. I think the writing improved a touch more, and the characters were more pleasant to read about, so I did give that book a higher rating, and I look forward to discussing the sequel with you at a later time. Thanks so much for watching today. So that was my book review of City of Bones. I'm also currently reading the third, as I mentioned, City of Glass. I'm also reading, what is that book? Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbett. It's actually really good so far, and I really love rom-coms, so I'm looking forward to learning a little more about that. I'm listening to Sorcery of Thorns, and I cannot remember the author, so 1 second. Margaret Rogerson. Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. The audiobook is actually really good so far and has kept my interest. I am pretty picky about narrators, though, so maybe that is just me. And finally, I am also reading A Heart So Fierce and Broken. This is the sequel to A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kammerer. I can never say her name correctly, so I apologize to you, author of this very interesting series. I also gave the first book in this series 3 stars last year, but I have heard good things about the sequel, and the third book did come out this year, so I will let you all know my thoughts on these books as well at a later time. Thanks so much again for watching my video today and for just being a witness of everything that I am thinking about the books that I am reading. I look forward to discussing more books with you in the future, and I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday afternoon.